I'm just as fast and I'm just as strong and I'm just as committed and I'm just as driven as anybody else here. And you can take horrifyingly bad experiences and memories and you can move on. All the things you're supposed to try to sort of make sure that you're healthy. But the fact was, I kind of was healthy all along.
Hey everyone, I'm Jess and this is the YTP, the YogiTriathlete podcast. We are just shy of 1 month into our Ride the High Vibe tour and connections are flowing. We are completely immersed in the community up here in Lake Placid, and I can tell you now it's going to be so hard to leave. We touched upon our daily routine or lack thereof in the last episode, and I just have to say that every day continues to be a test of our flexibility. BJ and I are under no illusion anymore that we are in charge of anything. And I feel like we're truly experiencing what it's like to live moment to moment. And it's not without challenge. For sure, we are being challenged all along the way. But what I'm seeing in both of us is this ability to just change course when necessary and move forward. No doubt a reflection of our time spent on the mat and the meditation cushion. It is making what could be a very bumpy road into a lot more enjoyable path to travel. And this is exactly what our guest today does in her life, whether it be dealing with the news she just received moments before recording this interview, or flowing with major life direction changes that she never would have wished on anyone, let alone her own family. This week, BJ and I bring you a very special guest. She is a triathlete, she is a mom of twins, and she is my beloved cousin. We chat triathlon, we ponder pain and the powerful influence that it can have and that it did have on our relationship for many years. And Gail opens up about the greatest loss in her life and how she is not only surviving but thriving in her new chapter. But I'm not going to talk too much about this because I would hate to give any spoilers to this conversation. What I can tell you is that Gail's story, although steeped in devastating loss, is a story of acceptance, perseverance, and survival. She is one of the strongest people I know, and I'm so excited to share her strength with you. So prepare yourself to settle in with this honest and revealing conversation with one of my best friends, Gail McCarthy.
Right. But you also mentioned in more than one episode the ego and the place that the ego takes in this. It's center stage when you're doing it. It wants to be.
It wants to be center stage.
If you let it be. This morning I'm in physical therapy now for a frozen hip, and I was told just a couple hours ago that you're running for the summer's over. Like you're not gonna, let's give this a break for a while and see but you might not do your goals, the running portion of your goals this summer. And it was like somebody told me I couldn't have children, or somebody, I was like, what? I'm sorry, what did you say? Like, it's like this devastating thing. And then driving here, I just looked, again, big picture. And I remembered, of course, BJ, you're in my head all the time, your horrifying injury recently that left you unable to do an Ironman that you had trained for and planned for. And also left you in incredible pain. And it's just one of those things that puts it in perspective that I almost don't even remember that now. And you know what I mean? Because of all the other successes that you've had with, and happiness that you've found in other races since then. And there are other things that you can do. There are other things that maybe I don't need to be focusing on my run right now. Maybe I need to be focusing on other things. So I was very proud of myself how quickly I let that go today. Forgot about it until you just mentioned.
Awesome. This summer, if you look at your life, right? Well, we're just talking about this life. Mm-hmm. It's a blip.
It's a blip. It's completely.
And I always remind myself, like, the running community is not going to shut down because Jessica Mikowski's like not on the starting line, right? Seating yourself way too high once again. It's not going to shut down.
And that's sort of like the whole high vibe tour is we have a plan, but that plan is going to change daily, and we just have to be okay to roll with it. The same thing with my athletes and their injuries. They have a plan. They have a race season. Things pop up. Yep. Guess what? Now you're going to take a detour.
Right.
And it's there for a reason.
Right.
You know, I learned so much from that experience, as you know pretty well. And I carry that through me now to my coaching and to my training. But what I did in those instances was throw myself into support. Remember, I started helping you out with coaching. I volunteered at the 10K, like just throw myself into other things, and I met people, and there's other things you can do. That's a great
idea. That's kind of what I'm thinking. There are other ways that I can do this.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like volunteer with the kids at a race.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely can do that.
Such a great way to... I think that's such a great thing to do, too, because when you're injured, you can watch that ego want to take center stage and have, like, the pity party. And it's just about letting that energy move through you, not trying to push it down, just let it move through you. So to stop looking at injury as such a negative, that it's there for you because there's something there for you to master.
It's so true, and I've been wondering where this other sort of thing, this phase that's happening in my life, was trying to fit in my life, where some friends of mine that are not necessarily related to each other in any way are starting running just now, and they're asking me, oddly enough, for my advice and on just sort of how to go, from the non-runner to the runner, and how to do it safely. And I'm taking everything that you've helped me with, both of you, and trying to encourage these folks. And one of the first things I thought today was, maybe it's just, this is not my year, this is my year to support these other people. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of thinking of it. And the volunteer idea is certainly something I should do as well, with the kids. And it's probably a good idea for me to just support them in their sort of activities and things, which I'm constantly doing anyway. But as far as the running goes, maybe it's my turn to kind of take the back seat. And again, if I let my ego take over this, the thought process, and we're not our thoughts. It's how we are what we do with those, is sort of my philosophy. But
oh my God, you're talking like a true yogi triathlete. I love it.
But it's really, really true. And it's sort of something I'm learning now in my, mid to late 40s, that it really is, how you react and respond to not just the things that happen around you, but to the thoughts that, do I feel guilty because I think this certain thought? Do I feel happy because I think this certain thought? So the thought, instantly is, that the running community is going to shut down because I had my best, my fastest, race a year ago, and which is, let's just put it out there for anybody who doesn't know me, it's certainly not breaking any speed records here. We know, we know this. You guys both
your
know
speed
this.
records.
But I am breaking my own speed records.
That's all that matters.
And that's all that matters. But coming off of that, where I kind of wanted to challenge myself even further and see, I did that last year. How can I, and it's not just that, it's sort of the mental aspect that I've been really breaking through with, the swim and all this stuff. Now that I'm doing that, what can I do this year? And part of me has been thinking, well, maybe this is the year that I just sort of relax a little bit and just, just take it easy and just have fun. And so this little injury it just almost makes sense, if that, makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think that you're gifting yourself such a reward by taking this perspective. Because you could take the other one, and you probably have in the past, and so you know how that feels. That usually feels pretty crappy, But if your life is on the marquee on Broadway, it's Gail's life and not Gail's ego featuring Gail.
Right. And I've never been a competitive person, and I'm a mom of 2 now. And in kids' sports these days, it is it's almost frightening how competitive things are. And I'm not raising Olympic athletes, I'm not raising scholars, I'm raising really good people, and that's kind of how I have to look at it. But it is really difficult not to get swept up in the competitive nature of a lot of these things with these young kids. It's crazy, and that sometimes seeps into my own activities. And so that competitive thing, which I've never really felt before, I've never been a competitive person, is now sort of eking its way into my little psyche. And I'm like, well, if all these people I know are starting to run, I really need to be out there so that I can be showing them you don't have to be doing it to show or to teach or to guide. You can, and obviously, better than anyone. And so I'm trying to, I'm just really happy with the fact that just a few hours ago, I got something that maybe, I don't know, last year would have really bummed me out. And now I'm kind of like, whatever, I'll make it work.
It's exactly how you react to it. Like, right. And I was telling this to an athlete, I think it was yesterday, just flip it around. Just flip your attitude around so you can go down that dark hole and be like, this is the worst. This is going to be the worst summer. I'm not going to be able to run fast.
And what good does that do?
And what is it going to do?
Right.
But turn it around and be like, okay, now it's time to get stronger. What can I do to prepare my body now? And who cares what other people are doing? I find that's such a piece of the athletes that I work with too. They're looking at stats. They're looking at other people. They're training more. They're looking at their logs. They're training with friends that possibly are going longer that day when they should be going shorter and not sticking to the plan. And you get caught up in this vicious cycle of looking at other people's training regimens, but you don't know what they've done in the previous year, 5 years, 10 years. You don't know their history.
You don't know what they're ever doing.
Right.
And I just had this conversation with somebody recently where, as sort of the non-athlete kind of coming up into, this sport of triathlon, like, sprint triathlon, but it's just interesting how, road races, sprint triathlons, regardless of the venue or what exactly it is you're about to embark on, it is a community and we all share, sort of a common bond, but yet somehow when you go into these races and you see all of these athletes and you just sort of presume that they're all better than you. There's almost this feeling of like, well, I don't belong here. I'm not a natural athlete. I didn't run in high school. I didn't this, I didn't that. Well, I don't belong here. And then when you look later at the stats and you look at your own times and you look at your own feeling after your performance, I sort of say this prayer every time I do any kind of, race is just, and I do this for my kids too, for their activities, just let me be smiling and happy when I'm finished. Regardless of what makes that happen, let me have a positive experience and be smiling and happy when I cross the finish line. And so I've been smiling and happy when I cross the finish line for various reasons. It's all, like you said, how you look at it. So I try to go into these, any sort of race now and say, I do belong here. I'm just as good and I'm just as fast and I'm just as strong and I'm just as committed and I'm just as driven as anybody else here. And so it's really interesting. I wonder how many other athletes are out there thinking the same.
Everyone.
The same thing. Oh, I know. Yeah, absolutely. And so when you're there, you're not aware of that. You're just so focused on your own, and then just start chatting with anybody in the swim wave start before your wave goes off. Right. They're all feeling the same way.
So what you're touching upon here, like I always take it to a spiritual level. What you're talking about here is the opposition between separateness and connection, right? So when you walk into that transition area and you're like, oh my God, everyone's better. That's separateness. You're separating yourself. So
100%. Yes.
That's functioning from your ego. That's
right.
That's letting your ego say, this is the ego show,
right?
And it sometimes features Gail,
yeah.
And then you make a connection with someone and you realize that you're more similar than different. And that's connection, and that's union, and that's yoga. And that is what the core of each one of us is like there's a deep, deep line of connection between each one of us. And we start to see it just by a simple conversation. Like it doesn't have to be in a temple. It can be in, T1.
Right.
At a race.
Right.
And it's very simple. And, we're going to experience a lot of connection, I think, on this tour. And we might also experience separateness. We might experience some resistance, but it's,
sure.
It's every experience you have, whether that is connecting with someone, whether that is walking in and saying, oh my God, I'm not good enough, whether that is your running is done for the summer. Every single experience you have is the exact one you're supposed to have in that moment, right then and there, right? There is no right or wrong. I think I said this in my class last night. There is no right or wrong. There's only experience. That's it. And then the difference between, I've been thinking a lot about this lately too, like the difference between the ordinary, or what I like to say, the untrained mind, right? And there's a lot of athletes out there that have untrained minds. Is that we see the thought, we see the emotion, and then we put a meaning to it. And then what that does is that requires us to cling and attach to it. And then, then you start to fill the bag with the lead and carry it around. And the yogi mind, which it sounds like you're not sure why, but you're definitely adopting one, might have been those few classes you took with me.
Absolutely.
Is that we just see things in their pristine state. We see them as they come to us in the moment. And when we can do that, we're just able to move through them, and we're just able to move from one moment to the next. And this is how you don't miss your life. You miss your life when you're all caught up in the future of what I can't do or what I should do, or, that's missing your life, because your life is happening right now.
It's amazing. Two things that just came to mind. And it's just amazing how this connects all back to something I've learned from either one or both of you that I've applied to just daily life, not just, training or racing, but, the separateness and the connectedness. We are at some level all the same. And when you've said that, I think, we're all from the same, we're all, it's so true. And when you remove that separate, that wall between you and the other triathletes in T1, for example, or when you remove that wall between you and the person behind you in line at the market, or when you remove those walls, things become a lot easier. And so just remove the separateness, and then it kind of just boils down to a very simplistic concept that you have taught in class so many times. And then the other thing you just mentioned that leads me directly back to BJ's training, and I believe it was the Ocean Road 10K that you had really just told me about staying in the moment, and a few different concepts that I think of just when I'm just even out for just a recreational run is this is where I was so stuck for so many years, doing these little road races and, just being happy with what I did, but never really pushing myself, is I didn't know how to push myself. And the way you were able to help me do that was so simple, but it was, don't worry about the time you're going to finish in. Don't worry about the finish line. Don't worry about who's at the finish line. Don't worry about who's in front of you. Don't worry about who's behind you. Just do what you need to do in that moment and feel your feet beneath you for every step, and be in that step, be in that breath, be in that moment. And it wasn't something that honestly was easy for me to do, but once I was able to do it, and it was in that race. I tried to do it in training. It didn't really, it didn't really click. And then in the race, during the race, I could tell you all the crazy thoughts that were going on. And you said, it's okay. You're going to go off. You're going to veer off. Just bring yourself back. Just come back to the moment. And it was amazing how it changed the experience. And that's what makes me smile and be happy when I'm finished now, because it's a completely different take on the experience itself. And I remember so much more of the race itself now. The races used to be a blur.
Yeah, you didn't miss it.
Didn't miss it this time, so now that's kind of how I'm doing that. And then the other thing you had said to me for Timberman, I believe it was okay, just take a moment and think for a second while you're running or riding or swimming. Am I doing what I could be doing right now? Am I reaching that full potential in that step? Am I moving as quickly, or am I as strong as I can be right now? Or can I go just a little harder? Not a lot. Not, don't go out and kill yourself, but can I go a little harder? Am I doing everything right now? And if you are, great, stay there. And if not, push it a little, see what happens. And it's just amazing the things that I hold on to, even just in my short little recreational runs now. And that it is unbelievable, the difference, not just physically in speed or time or anything. I've become so much less about that, but my enjoyment of it, so much, it's just so much better.
And I think you said it so well. It's just being there. How you make decisions being there. You're not tuning out to music. You're not tuning out to competitors, or, it's great to take in the scenery. You should take it in every moment you can, but it's being in that moment and seeing how did your body feel? Because it's so easy to put on cruise control.
Oh yeah.
I can click off 9-minute miles and I'll just do 9-minute miles and just click it off. But when you continually check in with yourself, how much harder can you go?
I used to run races and think that exact thing. Well, I used to literally think, okay, well, the next race I'll push a little harder. Well, I'm in a race.
Right.
Because I'm uncomfortable. So I don't want to get any more uncomfortable. Right. I'm sure I could do better the next time. I don't think this is going to be my race today. I'll do it next time. I don't do that anymore.
Right.
I don't do that anymore. And regardless of how I finish, I just enjoy the race more.
That is it right there. Who cares if you finish the race or not finish the race? You're going to finish the race.
Right.
But who cares about the result or the finish? Just try and push it and see what happens.
Yep.
Don't fear failure.
Right.
Failure.
And don't predict success either.
Right.
You know, because sometimes you do that and you're like, I am jamming it right now. This is amazing. Like I'm gonna have a PR today. And if you start going that way, it's the same effect. It's not necessarily a positive effect, even though you're sort of cheering yourself on. You've lost the moment. Now you're no longer in the moment.
Right.
Regardless of whether you're feeling positive about the finish or not, now you're not in the moment anymore.
Yeah,
and that was
moment is
so hard
everything.
for me to do, and I just somehow it clicked during training, and then having a few successes during races that way, and how we define success is completely different for everybody. So it's irrelevant what I think of when I say success. But
I think as athletes we put tons of pressure on ourselves. Time, predicted finishes, what we see from friends, what we see from results, and just be yourself. Be yourself, race your race.
Right.
Stick to your plan. And
it's so funny. I'm listening to you guys talk and you're talking about a race, but I'm pretending that I'm hearing you talk just about life, right? Because that's what it's all about. Stop comparing yourself to somebody else. Just live your own life, right? Like we can't compare our paths and things like that. But I want to get back to this idea of connection. Because you and I have a really interesting story that I think needs to be shared, and I will tell my version, and I want you to tell your version, because I bet there's some things that I don't know about. But you and I are cousins. We're first cousins. We look like sisters.
We do.
Your daughter looks like my daughter.
More like you than she looks like
me,
like for sure. Yes.
Yeah. So. I have her school picture on the fridge, and I'm like, oh my God, she looks just like me. It's so awesome.
It is.
But our moms were sisters, and my mother's name is Joan, and your mother's name was Barbara.
Right.
And the way that my mom describes Barbara is that she was her best friend. It was her little sister. And she was funny, and she had a really dry sense of humor, which my brother has. Everybody loved her. She was hysterically funny, but she was also really sick.
Right.
And she had a lot of darkness in her life. She was an alcoholic.
Right.
I was in my mother's womb during the time that your mom was getting to the end. I was born in March of 1972, and your mom, is my understanding, literally drank herself to death the night before her 30th birthday.
Right.
Yeah, which is so crazy. And her birthday was on Halloween.
Right.
And so at that point, I'm 6 months old. So it's interesting to me, and looking back on my life and the transformation that I've had and the things that I've had to release and work through, and a lot of trauma. But if you looked at my life on paper, there was not a lot of trauma. So I'm sure that I absorbed a lot of that when I was, in my mother's body, and even in those first 6 months as your mom was so sick. And I've heard some stories, but essentially I grew up seeing pictures of this little girl and this little boy, and I didn't know who they were. And it was you and my other cousin, Michael, your brother. I remember even telling my friends, I think I've got cousins. But it was nothing. The pain was so intense, and it still is for my mom, so intense that she could never talk about it, right?
Same with my dad. Very rarely.
Yeah,
very rarely.
So we were told, this is my experience. Now, if my mother listened to this, she'd probably say she had a different experience. But again, this is my perspective, my experience. And my sister and I were always the curious ones. So we would try and ask questions. And so we were all told very different stories along the way. I was told they were on a double date, and your mom had a heart attack and died.
Oh, my.
Yeah, so that was one story that I heard. So it was always a heart attack, which essentially is exactly how she died.
Probably
Yeah,
happens
because
ultimately, right?
Yeah, because they tried to give her a blood transfusion
Right.
and her heart couldn't handle it. So then I'm getting older and I'm comparing notes with my sister and, just kind of talking behind closed doors. And again, you would ask my mom a question about you and she would just close down and walk away. And I know that she'd probably just go behind a door and cry because this was her best friend. And it was also my understanding that at her funeral, you guys weren't there, that I don't know if anybody was there. Like, I know our grandparents were not there. Like, just really, really sad because my Nana and Pa, who I was so close to, and I can't believe that you didn't, it's so hard for me to believe that you didn't have the experience that I have. And then there's part of me that's so angry that I didn't have that experience with them as I was growing up because I had so much fun with them. They were awesome, awesome people. But they weren't even at her funeral, their daughter's funeral. They weren't even there because it was too much.
Wow.
Yeah. And so my mom said that when she showed up, you guys weren't there. They left and they went to the flower shop and they got 2 flowers for you and Michael. And they put them on the casket and she was buried with those. And so again, getting back to like kind of how the story was unfolding, it wasn't until like 2004. Remember I went on this family cruise. It was one night at dinner and we were on the ship and we all sat around and Suzanne and I were just, that's my sister, Suzanne. And Suzanne and I were just like, all right, that's it. We're going in. Like, let's get some answers.
Yeah,
and I'm now married, so I'm in my 30s.
Right.
And the internet had already happened. Every once in a while on the internet, I would type in your name and then nothing. And I'd be like, all right, and because I just knew like I was gonna find you. Like I was gonna find you someday. I knew it. I was on a mission. So that night on the cruise ship, we were on a mission. And that's when we got the most out of my mom. And then she got to a point where she said, that's it. I can't anymore. We heard a lot of stories about how my dad would go over to your house and he would take you guys and bring you to my house and then go back and take care of your mom through, the night sometimes. And you guys would stay with us. And on that night, October 30th, that she just drank and drank and drank and drank. And I believe my dad brought her to the hospital and they tried to do a blood transfusion. It was too much for her heart. There was too much alcohol in her body and her heart gave out and she died. And that the last my mom had known about you guys was a very disconnected interaction with your dad.
Right.
I still don't know what the bottom of what that was, but there was a lot of pain between the two of them, maybe just around the loss of this amazing person.
Sure.
That he had said to my mom, you will never see these kids again. And I think it was after that, so that was 2004. God, this whole story is leading into another huge story, but we'll get to that. And I just started looking for you and looking for you and looking for you. So it was 2008 at the end of the year. And it was like classmates.com. You came up, classmates.com, Cumberland, Rhode Island, Gail Giambese. And then I could send you a message. And then it was like upgrade to the gold level to see Gail's response. And I was just like, whatever.
Come on, Jess, pay the $10.99.
Yeah, I know. Like I've been looking for her for 40 years now. Like, should I spend the $9.99 or not? And I don't know what I did. I think I just walked away at that point. And then I got an email from you and it was really simple. And you just said, yes, my mother and your mother were sisters, and it's me, and I'm your cousin, and then we connected, and it just so happened that BJ and I were coming back for the baptism of our godson, Vincent, in January. So that was January of 2009, and you and I set up a time to meet here in Newport because you lived in Rhode Island, and which was the place that we used to live. Which was also the place where BJ and I worked for the same company, and we worked with an advertising and PR firm that you also worked for at that same time.
You can't write this. I was sort of the low man on the totem pole there as art director at the time, and we had a receptionist that wasn't always there, that when the phone rang, very oftentimes I would answer the phone And I'm convinced that I have spoken to both of you on the phone without knowing.
Ultimately, we were connected, and the thing that you and I had heard, because there was a time, and I want you to talk about this, where you met my brother
Yes. Yep.
in Providence
Yep.
Years back when he was in college, I think.
A little after
college. And so we knew that we looked alike.
Yes.
That's all we knew.
Yes.
And so we made a time to meet at a coffee shop downtown. And I don't know which one of us said, like, well, how will...
I said, how am I going to know it's you when I get there?
Yeah.
And I said, just look for somebody that looks like you.
Yeah, just look for somebody that looks like you.
Okay, will do.
And that day you walked in and it was like there was no disconnect. It was like we had just seen each other the week before.
Absolutely.
And we sat down. I had just done my first Ironman. You had just run your first marathon.
Right.
You had just done your first triathlon. Right. And
actually, it was my second marathon, but yeah.
Yeah.
It was, yep.
But you had just done your first triathlon.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
and then
right.
It was just like we had known each other our whole lives,
Right.
which I believe I always have.
I totally believe that.
Completely connected with you my entire life. It's so amazing that we don't have to have these physical bodies to feel connected, and that I felt so connected with you my entire life.
Instantly.
And I just love you so much. And there's so much darkness and dark energy and sadness around our experiences, but I never feel that at all.
It's not there for me at all.
No.
It's never been.
No. And then there was one beautiful moment in this 2009 where my mom and your dad came together.
Yes, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah,
because that to me that was a big.
They had a very healing.
It was a very
moment.
Profound moment in my life when that happened. So we'll have to talk about that in a little more detail. The interesting thing about how you described the story. There's so many interesting things about it, but I could go on, and detail my sort of side of it in terms of what I was told as I grew up, and it wasn't really spoken about very much, but pretty much everything you said is sort of accurate in terms of what I was told, but we just didn't speak about it. And I was curious, and I would ask a few questions, and things got kind of shoved under the rug the way things like this did back then, I think, in families. But grew up with my dad, and he had apparently moved us out because of my mom's drinking. We were, in vehicles with her where we were ending up in ditches. And I was one, and my brother, who's 15 months older, was 2 at the time, and my dad.
But you have some recollection of that, don't you?
I have some recollection of being in vehicles with her. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. I don't remember what I had for breakfast, but I remember being in vehicles and being pulled over, things like that. I remember very sketchy, vague, fuzzy details about certain things. When I was 1, my dad removed us from the home. And they were in divorce proceedings. Yes, they were. That's right. So when she died, they were toward the end, I believe, of divorce proceedings. So they were still legally married, I believe, but I don't think the divorce ever actually was finalized. I'm not even sure. This is how sketchy this is. This is how vague the information was transferred to me by my dad, who just didn't want to talk about it.
And that just shows you the power of pain.
Right. This man shut down. Oh, yeah. And he was
same thing.
He was a very stoic, sort of quiet, private person. And I can't say enough, wonderful things about my dad, but I think if he were here today, he would probably agree that he could have handled this entire situation very differently. But he moved us in with his parents, who were sort of straight off the boat from Romania when they were teenagers. So, but the interesting thing of my recollection about you, and I just told this story to somebody recently, it comes up quite often, is that when I remember you being a baby, I'm going to say, there's a photograph that I have in my mind of this time. So I'm going to say you were probably somewhere between 6 months and a year old, maybe. So I was a child. I must have been 3 maybe. This is probably before my mother died, obviously, if we were in the same room. But I remember baby Jessica. So I had gotten a baby doll. I became consumed with you for some reason. So I had this little baby doll, one of those little Milton Bradley,
Baby Jessica, not Baby Jessica.
No, not the well baby.
The one that fell down the well?
No, Baby Jessica Costello.
Me.
Komkowski.
Yeah.
You. Your wife.
Not the one in People magazine.
Please tell
just
me
yet.
Please tell me you're not the well baby.
No, I'm not the well baby.
I had somebody gave me as a gift a baby doll, and I named her Jessica because as a little child I thought all babies need to be named Jessica. I named my baby doll after you.
That's so crazy.
So if you can even imagine, and I had that doll my whole life, but So that I do actually have that sort of recollection. But then I also have the recollection, and this is just skip to it, where my dad, and it didn't occur to me until I was an adult, came upstairs from downstairs. I was in the kitchen. He called my brother and I into the kitchen and told us that our mom had died. And I was maybe just turned 4, I believe. So I was like, that's nice. What's for lunch? Like, I didn't understand the concept of death. So I was like, how terrible. And it occurred to me years and years and years later as an adult, there was an unfinished basement downstairs. At one point, ultimately, his bedroom was down there. It was a finished basement. But at that time, this was an unfinished basement with no telephone, there was nothing down there for him. I'm thinking that this man had to pull himself together to tell us this news. He probably just removed himself from our view so that he could, and that's kind of like always stuck with me, that it never occurred to me what he was doing and why he had been in the basement before he told us. And I think it was just a matter of trying to, I think, steel himself or compose himself, try to figure out how do I deliver this news to a 4 and a 5-year-old. He was very much in love with my mom, and he helped her as best he could, like any of us who deal with who have loved ones that struggle with alcohol. It's so difficult to watch. There is nothing you can do. It's the most helpless position in the world. And he told me all of the different things that he did, the psychiatrists, the clinics, the rehabs, all of the different things that back then you couldn't talk about, especially for a woman. You just couldn't say, my wife's in rehab. It was not something people did back then. And he, again, being a very private person, was not anywhere near willing to share that information with anyone. And so he didn't. And I think even to the point where he tried really, really hard to protect her and people's perspective of her and her sort of reputation, not reputation, but he wanted people to continue to love her and not judge her. So they hid it. And they didn't even tell. And I think there was a certain time where he said that, her own sister, your mom, he didn't share a lot of the stuff with her because he knew it would break her heart. And then at the end, he sort of ended up eating it by, just not even ultimately opening up and saying, listen, this is something she's struggled with for a long time. And when he took us and left, there were a lot of people that thought, how dare you leave this woman? Like, what has she done wrong? And he didn't tell anyone, and he took the hit.
He definitely took the hit.
He took a big,
for sure.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it shows you like that, oh man, how powerful pain is and how infectious it is that stories got, relayed, even with a negative tone around this beautiful light of a woman who, had the darkness and had the sickness, and, eventually it was her demise. But then even after that, even after her leaving and the pain of all that, there was so much more pain that persisted because there was no talking about it.
Next to nothing. And then we would be at a family function, or we would, I would be just, I would see somebody who knew my mom and I just heard the same things over and over about how beautiful and funny and smart and artistic and this. And
yeah, she was artistic.
Very,
yep.
And just all of this sort of stuff. But I just always felt very disconnected because I never knew her. I don't really have a lot of memories. I didn't have photos. So it was very disconnected for me that I just sort of, I had a dad and I had these loving grandparents that helped raise me. And that was kind of it. And then when people would say, like, where's your mom? And I go, oh, she died. And that was it. It was really, there was no pain associated with it for me until it was one night, oddly enough, in college. My best friend was my suite mate and had the room next to mine. And she was struggling, studying for whatever exam. And I was like, okay, what's going on? How can I help? And she's like, oh, no, I just have to get through this. It's really hard. And then she just sort of stormed off. out of the suite, and I said, where are you going? And she said, I'm going to go call my mom. And she was really upset. And it was like, just what she did in that moment was go to her mom, because she was just having a hard day, a hard night. And it hit me like a ton of bricks that I never had that I didn't have that person. I mean, I always had my dad, and I always went to him for things, but it was very different when you're a girl, being able to go to your mom. And it never occurred to me. My grandmother was, sort of elderly, and at that point she had passed away. She had passed away when I was in high school, but to not really have the mom figure. And it was, I spent the rest of the night in my room in tears, and I couldn't really figure out why. And then it occurred to me, I'm missing that. And I never grieved it. And it was probably a whole night and into the next day. And then I sort of snapped out of it somehow and went about my business and went, well, that was weird. And it didn't occur to me until a few days later that was Halloween.
Oh, interesting.
And it didn't.
That was her birthday.
It was her birthday, and it was the day of her death, essentially.
Yes.
It was, and it didn't occur to me until way later, where I put that together days later, that was however many years after, and that was a, sort of a meaningful date. And I didn't know that. And I was like, why was I so upset the other day? And I just feel like it was something in the universe.
Definitely.
Forcing me to grieve on that day.
Definitely her essence, I think, was with you for sure. And, not only did you not have your mom, you did not have your aunt.
Right.
My mother.
Right.
You did not have your maternal grandmother.
Right.
My Nana, Jessie, you knew her, didn't you, BJ?
Uh-huh.
Nana?
Yep.
We'd go down to the liquor store. She used to love her Jim Beam. And she always said that she had 3 men in her life. She would wake up with Ben Gay, have lunch with Jack Daniels, and go to bed with Jim Beam. So
wow,
maybe there's been some drinking in the family. I don't know. We do come from a long line of jovial Irish people. Yes. So getting back to that, I mean, just there's the pain. There's so much pain, and so we can't. I mean, I can't point a finger of blame or anything like that, because again, that's not a loving thing to do to anyone. To have literally kept us from each other for so many years. But I never felt, like I said, the moment you walked in, it was like we just kind of, like we had seen each other the week before, and we just kind of picked up.
Right. And I had said to you, just recently that, I look at other people and their relationships with their cousins, and some people are close to their cousins and some people are not so close. But I do believe that, and I don't walk around constantly saying everything happens for a reason. I don't necessarily believe that entirely. I believe that we make our destiny and we create what happens for ourselves, and we make decisions, and we have free will and all of that. But it's interesting to me that if you and I had been in touch, if our families had been in touch, and we were spending winters, skiing together, and we were at the beach and at the Cape, over the summer, I wonder if maybe our relationship wouldn't be as special. I know. And you said that, it's pretty much every moment we're ever together and every conversation we ever have is so meaningful.
It's so precious.
Right?
I know.
So I don't think I would trade that.
Because I still feel like I'm making, I
don't feel cheated in any way.
I think, and I think that there's always this bigger picture of, I'm making up for lost time with
Absolutely.
you. But, and just how we were brought together at such a amazing time with you just finishing your first triathlon and me just doing my first Ironman and just connecting on that and being like, oh my God, who is this totally awesome, cool chick that looks like me? I love her. And so then that was 2009 that we met, and we stayed in touch. We went back to Colorado, and we had a plan that we were going to come back in July. And you and your husband, Jimmy, and your 2 kids, Bryn and Nicholas, you guys were going to come up to the Cape, and we were going to do a big boat ride. And I remember we were getting close to our trip. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't heard from you. I got an email. You said, "Oh, we're getting ready for the Vermont Sun." Was it called the Vermont Sun?
Vermont Sun. Yep.
The Vermont Sun Triathlon. That was going to be basically the weekend before we were leaving to go home, and then we were going to meet up. And I was so excited to meet Jimmy. I had talked to him on the phone, and I know that one thing is that he was so happy. found just massive contentment in knowing that we had been reconnected.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
We were getting close, and I remember saying to BJ, I haven't heard from Gail. I said, okay, but we're going to see, we're going back and we'll see her next weekend. And I was just so excited, that like I found myself just like wanting to really, make sure that it happened. Like it was really like felt like important. It was important, and I felt like I really needed to make it all happen because I had visions of all of us going out on our boat. And that was something we did as a family, was we went out on our boat every summer to this place, we called it the island, right? Like nobody's ever called an island before, but we called it the island, and we would go out, and it was this beautiful place. And I just wanted to have that experience with you guys. And I thought, oh my God, after all these years, we're going to have it. It's going to be perfect. It's going to be amazing. I can't wait. And I called you or I sent you an email and, haven't heard from you, blah, blah, blah. And the phone rang one day, and it was you. And you said, I said, Gail, hi. And you just said, oh, Jess.
I don't even remember
this. This is exactly what happened. You said, I was sitting in my office in Boulder at home, and you said, oh, Jess, it's Jimmy. And I said, what happened, Gail? What happened? You said, he died. Oh,
it's like, how else do you say that? You know what I mean?
You said he died. And I said, what happened? Like, what happened? And so, why don't you tell the story?
So yeah, it was to be my second sprint distance triathlon. I had done the Danskin women's triathlon the year before, 2008, with a girlfriend of mine who we ran together, and we're like, what else can we do to push ourselves a little bit? And I believe it might have been the men who said triathlon, the husbands, and we were like, okay. And we sort of, on a little bit of a challenge, did it, and really loved it. And so the next year, I decided I absolutely wanted to do one, and a group of neighbors said, one of them is a very experienced Ironman triathlete, and he said, we'll do it with you. We should all do it. So a bunch of neighbors got together.
And that's Bill, right?
Yep.
Who I ended up on a ride with last summer, which was so funny.
Right.
Yep.
Also part of
so we had some recollection of this story you're about to tell.
Yep. And so we all, packed up our stuff and we trained and trained together. We, some of us rode together, some of us ran together, and it was just sort of
and everybody was going to do it.
And everybody was going to do it. I was the only. There were 2 wives and 3 husbands, and then 4 husbands, and the other. We all went up, as couples. It was 4 couples, and we went up to Vermont. And during the training, looking back, I remember feeling as though Jimmy was. His most passionate activity, and there were 2 things that he looked forward to the most in life every year. One was a pig roast he went on every year with his friends, and he got to play guitar and hang out and drink beer with his buddies, and up in Maine. And it was one of those things he invited me to every year, and every year I went, thank you, no, I will stay home, have a lovely time, and sent him on his way with his tent and his beer and have a nice time. The other thing he looked forward to the most was riding in the MS 150. He was on the board of the local Rhode Island chapter of the National MS Society, not because we're necessarily in touch with or close with anyone that at the time that struggled with the disease or anything, but he simply, when he was selling office products, went in to sell them a copy machine, and they said, hey, you're a great guy. We could use somebody like you on our board. And he joined the board, and then just became very involved with them, and became involved with the ride, and just did the weekend 150-mile bike ride every year. And so that was his other highlight. So
and similar to your mother, from what I hear of Jimmy, he was just the life of the party.
The life of the party.
He was just funny. He was a beautiful light in people's lives.
He lit up a room, and didn't have a negative thing to say about anybody. And if he did, it was in incredible humor. His humor is what sort of lit up a room. That and his smile. And
you guys had a beautiful marriage, and you had at the time 5-year-old twins.
Right.
Yep. Bryn and Nick.
They had just turned 6. Right. So, but the how did I lose my train of thought as to where we were going with
So
the
the
triathlon?
two things was the biking. So
Right, so the MS 150 was something he was really, really passionate about. He was on a team called the Pedal Pushers, and
you said looking back on the training.
Looking back on the training, he had just completed the MS 150 2 weeks earlier. And I remember when we were doing some training, we did a brick workout. It was a ride and then a short run, and we did it with a group. And I remember looking back and being like, he's way back there. Like, what kind of strange. He was never going to be in the lead necessarily on the ride, but it was just kind of odd to me looking back that he was, way back there. And then on the run, we ran in my neighborhood up this, fairly steep hill. It's the hill I use for hill repeat workouts. And I remember him really, really struggling in the run. And I remember actually feeling like, well, this is what happens when you don't train enough. See? Don't you think you should get out there a little more, kind of thing. It was a little bit of judgment going on in my head that I didn't feel like maybe he hadn't been training hard enough or taking this race seriously enough. And he didn't take anything seriously. That man was all about fun. And work and his family was the only thing he was really serious about, supporting and providing for his family and making sure that we were all set. That was the only thing he took very seriously. So this was just kind of all fun for him. But I remember feeling a little judgment and kind of like, what's going on, But of course, I brushed that under the rug and didn't think a thing of it. But in short, while his wave was getting ready to go off, the women were after them. So my friend Amy and I were standing there watching as the men in his age group were going off. And I went up and said a few things to him, and I came back and I looked at Amy and I said, he is, may I swear?
Yeah, absolutely.
I said, he is scared shitless right now. And she was like, no, are you kidding? She said, he is so calm. And I said, no, I can tell. And she said, how can you tell? He looks like, I wish I could be as calm as him. I was just thinking that. And I said, no, I can tell.
Do you remember the final words that you said to him?
I don't remember the words, but this is what I was getting at, is that I could just tell because he was quiet. And he was just not saying much of anything, standing there in that wave. I remember feeling bad because I was like, he's really nervous. And he was never nervous about anything. He just was so go with the flow. So it kind of broke my heart a little. Like,
I wonder if he was not feeling well.
I'm sure he wasn't feeling well. But he was probably just nervous, like we all can be, regardless of how much experience I think we have. You've told me that you can still get nervous in the beginning of a swim wave. Having never done this before. And he was a swimmer in high school, so that was probably his most comfortable event. But I looked at him knowing he was really nervous, and we used to, regardless of like the details behind this, we used to call each other little guy. Hey, little guy. Hey, little guy. And there's a whole backstory there, but I'll spare you the details. But I went, little guy. And he looked over and I blew him a kiss. And he blew me a kiss back. And he smiled. And he got in the water. So then my wave, I think Amy's wave was next, and then my wave was out. So I was in the last wave. And being a somewhat panicky swimmer and nervous swimmer anyway, I was just really focused on going slow enough to not panic. And I said, I'm going to put myself way in the back. Let me put myself way in the back and not care. And I had those rounding that very first buoy, which was right there. I was like, I'm done. I'm panicking. I'm not gonna do this race. I'm done. And then somehow something settled over me where I just went, just slow down. And I remember my dad, I know I'm going on a tangent here, but I remember my dad swimming. Every time we went to the beach, he would just go way, way, way out, and he would just swim back and forth and back and forth. And he would go so slow. And when he taught me, the little bit of swimming that he did teach me, it was sort of like, there's no race, just strokes. And so I was like, go back to think of your dad, just go back and swim slowly. And I started swimming really slowly and being able to breathe. And I started enjoying it. And I was like, okay, this is good. This is a good swim. I don't care that I'm dead last. I don't care that I don't think there's anybody behind me. I'm going to get out of this water and I'm going to kill it on the bike. And as soon as I started getting really comfortable thinking how good I felt, the rescue boat went by me. And it created this incredible wake that made me swallow a little water. And I was like, what are they doing? I was a little annoyed. And then another boat went by. And I just presumed, okay, somebody's in trouble. And I thought to myself, that poor girl. Because I just presumed it was somebody in my wave. And I thought, that poor girl. And somebody's in trouble. But it's okay, Gail, don't let that alarm you. Just keep going. And I did. And just so happy that I wasn't panicking anymore. It didn't matter to me how slow I was going. It didn't matter that I was dead last. I kept swimming, and when I looked up and saw the shore, I was so happy. And I got out of that water with the biggest smile on my face because it was over. The swim was over, mercifully. It was over. And I looked up and I saw my two neighbors, my two friends, the wives that did not participate in the race, and they were crying. And I went, "What's up?" with this big smile still plastered on my face, and I'm trying to run by them. And they said, "Come quick, it's Jimmy." And I said, "What do you mean?" And I thought maybe he fell getting on his bike or something. Like, is he getting,
right?
Did he get cut? What do you mean? And she said, "They're working on him now." And I looked over and I saw him on the ground getting CPR.
Oh my God.
I don't think anybody has ever run as fast as I feel it was almost like a inhuman pace. Like I just ran. I don't even think you could call it a run. I think I flew. I can't explain it, but I ran over there. And, to spare the gory details of the whole horrific scene, essentially he had suffered a heart attack in the water, and they pulled him out immediately. From what I've been told, he put his hand up and said, "Help." And the boat was right there. And he went down. He put his hand up, said, "Help." He went down, and there was a man swimming next to him that saw this and sort of lifted him back up out of the water. So he was never down. He was never under really the water for a long time. And so they pulled him right out. The person on the immediate boat was the volunteer she was a physician. So she started CPR immediately on the boat. And then the motorboat that went by me, went by, and that's when they got him out of there really fast. And so when I got to him, they'd already been doing CPR for, I'm not sure exactly how long. They continued to do that. They got an ambulance there. This is all over the matter of a very long period of time, but they got him on the ambulance, and then they sent for paramedics because the ambulance just had EMTs. Paramedics came as we were on our route to the hospital. We stopped the ambulance so the paramedics could get on, because it was actually more critical for the paramedics who could administer the life-saving medication.
And you're in the ambulance
I'm in the ambulance.
Holding his hand.
I was sitting in the front and he was in the back
you.
getting worked on. So I kept turning and saying, his color is good. His color is good. And I knew this entire time. I saw him when I got out of the water. I knew that he wasn't coming back, but I kept saying, his color looks good. And they said, that's because we're doing very good CPR. And they kept saying that, and I kept saying that. And then at one point, I remember asking if there was a bag because I was going to vomit. And they gave me a bag, and then I snapped out of it and said, "Gail, this is so not about you right now. Do not vomit." And I also, in the ambulance, because they had to stop it so the paramedics could get on, it just seemed like an eternity to get to the hospital.
And they've been doing CPR for
a very long time at this point.
Time. And he's not responding.
Not responding. And it was administration of, I don't know how much medication, and just tons and tons of CPR. And it rivals, it doesn't rival, it puts away anything you've ever seen on television. It's just not anything. It is just the most surreal experience. And again, I knew that he was gone. I think my heart knew, but my brain was still trying to do the right thing and keep him alive in my brain. But I remember saying a prayer in the ambulance. I said, "Lord, if you're going to take him, take all of him. Like, don't leave like a piece of Jimmy for me," because that just wasn't going to be what he would want. So I knew. I can't explain this. I just knew that he was gone. There were physical signs, just the way he looked. I knew, but it just, and I appreciated them continuing to work on him. But at some point, I just wanted to know. And I wanted it to kind of move on. I just wanted to hurry up and see what is this? Is this real? Somebody please pinch me and make this real. And so it just continued when we finally got to the hospital, brought him into the ER, and then I was in there with him. And that's when I was holding his hand and just, and sort of encouraging him to stay with us, that kind of thing. But again, still knowing that this is all sort of a medical formality, if you will, and just knew that he wasn't coming back and that they needed to do their job. But I just, again, knew. And So then 2 of my friends who had been at the race, they were all called off the course. So they came to the emergency room, and two of them came in with me and were just sort of behind me, sort of, same thing, just kind of encouraging him to stay with us and whatnot. But ultimately, after another very long period of time, I think the whole entire thing, I can't remember the exact amount of time it was detailed in a report. So we essentially had to, I had to leave. I came to Vermont with my husband and had to leave Vermont without my husband. The long and the short of it is he suffered a massive heart attack. And according to the medical examiner who examined him in Vermont, he was in dire need of a quadruple bypass and had no idea. He had no idea that he had heart disease.
So he was a ticking bomb. Ticking
time bomb. And his dad had passed away a year and a half earlier, where he went to bed and did not wake up, but they had determined as well that was a heart issue. And he had bypass surgery himself probably 10 years earlier. So after this happened, his mother, his sister, his 2 surviving brothers, all got tested, and at least 2 or 3 of them, that I know of, have been told they had either high cholesterol levels. His brother also had a blockage that he had treated twice and had stents put in. And it's a very, very, genetically driven situation in this particular family on both sides, his mother's side and his father's side. So he was, it was just, again, a genetic thing. You hear about this all the time. He felt good, but he probably didn't know what really feeling good felt like, if that makes any sense.
Right.
And he had been told since probably about maybe the mid 2000, maybe 2004, he had been being told by his physician that he had high numbers and he had high cholesterol and he carried his weight around the middle and he had some markers that the doctor didn't like. And I remember reading a note, I don't like these numbers, let's do something. And then he would get himself in shape for the MS 150 and feel really great. And then in the winter he would sort of
Was he on any kind of high blood pressure medication?
At one point he was on high blood pressure medication. And I believe, in my recollection, what happened was he was training for the MS 150 and felt great, dropped some weight, was just feeling really kind of light on his feet and felt good. So he never refilled it.
And that was the 150 prior to this race?
I believe so, yeah. I believe so, because I think he would it might have been the year before. I can't remember. But at one point he was on blood pressure medication that he just never refilled.
So he had the signs.
Mm-hmm. He had all looking back, I know now he had all the markers. And being the sort of naggy wife that I was, I remember very specifically being like, seeing him eat certain things or seeing, I remember saying to him multiple times, you're not in college anymore. Like, you're not gonna, you can't come home and eat a bowl of the children's Cheez-Its, or you need to be a little bit more serious about your health. Just because you're working out, training for a ride or a triathlon doesn't mean that you're in perfect health. Like, just let's take care of, what we need to take care of. And then knowing what I know, even back then, it's not necessarily hindsight, I think how odd it was that I didn't say, why don't you just go to your doctor and get checked and get cleared for this? Because I got cleared before I did my first triathlon. I just went and made sure that I was cool. And
especially after,
for whatever reason, I didn't push him to do that. The naggy wife that I was, I thought, I kind of look back and go, why didn't I do that?
Because, you weren't supposed to. Right. I believe that this is how it was supposed to play out. And since then, Jimmy had classically hundreds of thousands of Americans have right now. I think it's 600,000 Americans will go on the operating table and have their heart cut open and have, a vein from their leg sewed in or a stent put in. This is happening all the time. So since this experience, life-changing to say the least, because here you are, a single mom, all of a sudden a 5-year-old or 6-year-old twins.
Right.
How has this experience changed you in the way that, has it changed you in the way that you live your life? Like, whether that be physically, health-wise, or just spiritually, mindfully?
I think I can just boil it down to one word, and that covers a few different things. But there's a strength there that, and you and I, BJ, had just had this conversation about you're stronger than you think you are. And I remember before Jimmy passed away, I was at my physician, just getting a checkup, and she was asking me about the history of, it might have been breast cancer in my family. And she said, grandmother? And I said, oh, I don't know. She passed away at this age. Grandma? Oh, I don't know. I didn't know the other grandmother. Mother? I don't know. She passed away when I was 3. It was just a lot. And for whatever reason, I remember her looking up at me and saying, you've had a lot of loss. And I remember going, oh, yeah, I guess I have. And I've never really been, I don't think, much affected by it. And then this happened. Right. And I remember saying, okay, yeah, I have. I'm good now. Thank you. I'm good in the loss department. That's full.
I agree. I have lived a lot of loss. Thank you.
I'm all set. And then 3 years later, my dad passed away. And so it's, I've had a lot of loss, but I think what the takeaway is here for me personally is I'm one of those people that, if you know me, I don't necessarily handle the small things very well. Kind of can very easily lose my shit over like nothing. But when it comes to the big things, what I've learned about myself is the inner strength that comes out when it needs to is just remarkable. It is remarkable. And how I think it's within each of us. I'm not differentiating myself from anyone else, but it is in there, and you can take horrifyingly bad experiences and memories, and then and you can move on. One day I'll learn how to move on from the small things, but right now, what I have learned is how to move on from the big things. And I've always been a very sentimental person, and I have attachments to things and attachments to people. I have attachments to music. And what I always thought of was that I would be one of those people in a situation of tremendous loss that would curl up in a corner in the dark in a puddle of my own pee and rock back and forth until until I feel better. And what I think that does is it makes it about me. It's not about me. Why would I do that? I have 2 children I need to raise. I have friends I need to love. I have a home to take care of. I have a life to live. And how on earth is that honoring a person or a person's memory if I'm going to live in that dark, corner? So, you can take that and take bits and pieces of it and apply it to like so many different things on so many different levels. But the sentimentality that people face, I think, when dealing with grief and loss, and everybody deals with grief differently, it's absolutely not universal at all. It's completely different for everybody. They talk about the stages of grief. I've read many books after this. I read a lot of books. People sent me books.
I remember you saying that, like, I can't with the grief books anymore.
I can't do it anymore. I mean, I went to therapy. I tried all the things you're supposed to try to sort of make sure that you're healthy. But the fact was, I kind of was healthy all along. And I didn't need the books, and I didn't, because it's within you already, and if you, whatever you need to do it. And I felt like I needed to go through certain processes. I went through a period where I made horrible decisions for a very long time. Finally snapped myself out of that. But the point about grief that I want to make is that when people are grieving, there's a tendency for that person to think, the harder I grieve, the more I cry, the longer I grieve, and the more I go down memory lane and go backwards, is commensurate with how much I loved that person. And that's not true. Like forgiveness. Forgive yourself if you're enjoying your life still. It's not a bad thing to enjoy your life still. You still have a life. And I remember somebody said to me about how happy I seemed shortly after. And he was so happy. And he said, I hope you go on to do this and this and this again. He said, because you have to remember. And I thought it was very harsh at the time, but it was very true. He said, Jimmy died, you didn't. And it sounds so harsh, but there's such a truth to that. And, it's sort of like, what would the person want? I mean, I think Jimmy would kick my ass if I did anything other than continue to live my life and enjoy my life and continue doing things like triathlon, and working out and trying to stay fit and trying to, enjoy the things in life, traveling, the things that we love to do together, I continue to do with my children. I'm in a relationship. I do these things with my boyfriend. It's just, I continue to enjoy life and forgive myself for the bad decisions I made in the beginning. I forgive myself for not grieving as hard as I thought I would, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And I can attest to your strength because I was at that funeral. Because I just so happened that I always had planned this trip
right
back home.
That was the weekend.
Right. And so that big boat trip ended up being coming to Jimmy's funeral.
Right.
And I remember sitting, I went with my mom and my brother, and I remember sitting in the church, and I walked up to you, and I thought, oh, should I just, like, you were sitting in the front row, and of course, and I thought, should I, I remember thinking, like, who is this for? And, like me getting up and going and hugging you. But I remember I got up and I went over and you just looked at me and you were just, I'm so glad you're here. And I gave you a big hug. And, but you were, the strength that you exuded that day was enough to carry that entire church and more. You stood up, you told beautiful stories. You told a really beautiful story about a butterfly in the hospital. Bryn, 6 years old, got up and read, and you just see like that strength that is within her, and just the friends and the guitars that were there on the, next to the casket. And it was just, I watched you so closely that day. And I remember thinking, like, that's that's definitely my family, because we are very, very strong. But when you said that, you don't do so well with the small things and you do well with the big things, I've always said that the big things kind of take care of themselves, right? Because when they are that big, you got to just take your hands off the wheel. You have no other choice. Like the speed from which you ran from your friends to Jimmy on the beach that day was not within your control. It was something else. So we get absolutely stripped down to the core of who we are, and the core of who we are is unlimited power and strength.
Right.
And you chose that to continue to live within that. I think despite the human experience of you should be grieving more, you should be doing this, you should be in therapy, you should be reading all these books, and you did all of that, you exercised it, but you realized that you had already what it was taking to get through it, which was just living.
Right.
And being there for your kids.
Right.
And I'll never, ever, ever, actually, you've said to me time and time again, like, oh, you're so strong, I can't believe you can do Ironman. And it's so funny because in moments where I need strength, I think about you that day at the funeral.
Aww.
When you got up and you spoke. And I just remember thinking that I would be in a puddle of my own pee in the corner and never leave it.
Right.
And I still think that maybe that would be the case if this man sitting next to me was taken away from me.
Right.
But then again, what I do know about myself is that to get in touch with your true nature, which traumatic and devastating events really allow you to do, because it fully awakens you. You become alive in those moments where nothing else matters except for what's happened. You are forced to be fully present. And when you are fully present, you are fully available for what is at hand, no matter how big it is.
Right. And when you get broken down to the bare bones of emotion and the surrealness is a word, but the surrealness of feeling like this is a bad dream and I'm going to wake up from this, and then realizing literally when you wake up the next morning that you're still dreaming. You're not dreaming, that this is your new reality. The extreme of emotions, I probably couldn't describe if I had, a pen and a scroll of paper that was 3 miles long. I don't think I could put into enough words like what that felt like. What it felt like that day, what it felt like, the next day, what it felt like the day after that, what the funeral felt like. All of that stuff is so beyond anything. And again, everybody's experience is different, but it's beyond anything I would have ever imagined. But what I'm blessed with, in addition to, you know, some inner strength that I think everybody has within them, is what I refer to always as my army of support. You know, I've got a ton of great friends. I've got great family, you guys. I remember saying, I think it was like at the wake, there was just a million people, you know, and, you know, 42-year-old man who's loved by so many people in all areas of his life passes away. That makes for a very, like, long line. And there's a lot of people that you need to, you know, hug and receive support from. And I was on total autopilot at the wake, just no idea who I was or what I was doing, and not a tear to be had. A couple, you know, if I saw certain people that would make me sad, but for the most part, you're just on such autopilot, and this weird adrenaline that happens that it's not the weepy, sad, teary thing that you know, imagine.
You're just letting it all move through you.
You're just present. You're kind of going through the motions, and you're sort of like a prop, and you're just kind of there. And as people came through, I do remember this one moment of clarity, saying to somebody that, look at this support, look at all these people here. And I felt like my grief, every person that went through the line, I felt like had a basket, like a little basket. And I was taking my grief and putting it into their basket. And they would walk away, and I'd put more grief into the next basket, and the next person would come, and I'd put my grief into their basket. And they carried that grief for me until I was ready to carry it on my own. And I don't know, you can't really pinpoint at what moment you're ready to carry that grief or take it back, but by the time you collect all those baskets back, it's a fraction of what it was.
Yeah. So it's that connection.
Yeah.
It all goes back to that deep connection.
And I often wonder I still think about this. It's heartbreaking to me. There are folks out there who don't necessarily have those connections, and I don't know. Who carries their grief for them? Who does, like, you need that, you know, and that's why, you know, I credit a lot of my the people I love and the people I'm friends with, and, you know, people who came from, you know, parts of my life that had long been over, you know, chapters in the book that had been closed, you know, as they come through the line, and you hadn't seen this person in years, and you go, wow, you're going to carry my grief for me right now. Thank you. And you just give them the, you know, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But I really do, my heart goes out to people that don't necessarily have that support group, that army that I talked about.
Well, it is, you know, I talked about our nature, and our nature is to love unconditionally and to support and to serve. And so big events like this in life, although I cannot even pretend that I know how it felt, nor do I ever hope to know that. But that this pulls us together. I mean, we always hear that it pulls us together. So I know we have to let you go here soon, because it's almost that time that you have to leave. Very close. So
yeah, I want to say one thing in sort of like a closing to kind of top this off on a positive note. And I think I mentioned this to you at one point. The connection between, you know, you and I and BJ and I and all of us and the whole family, like getting back together. And there was that moment too where your mom and my dad was at Jimmy's funeral.
It was at Jimmy's funeral,
and they hugged, and we were all there to see it.
And would that have happened? I don't think
that was Jimmy. Was Jimmy making that happen, because that connection was so important to him that not only did they hug in front of all of us. Yeah, we all saw it. Yeah, you know, it happened. It really happened, and that was and my dad at that point had been suffering from mild dementia. But he knew who she was, and he knew he was bearing a hatchet. He knew it.
And so did she.
It was beautiful.
Yeah. And so that moment was unbelievably healing. And since that moment, my mom has been more open than
I can tell too
ever,
for sure,
about talking about her sister and talking about everything that happened. So I mean, I think
even her voice is different when I speak to her, you know, which I don't speak to her frequently enough, but if I speak to her on the phone or when I've had the pleasure of seeing her voice sounds lighter to me than it did. She's just not burdened, I don't think, with that.
She just loves you, and she loves you now without guilt. She loves you now without the pain that was carried for so long.
And I've forgiven myself, and I've gotten that forgiveness, I shouldn't say, but I've let go of that loyalty issue that I might have had back in my 20s because my dad hugged your mom. It's really all connected. But getting back to the two of you in terms of your coaching, and for anybody listening who's looking for coaching, who's looking for motivation, support, these are the two people you need to support, because after something like that happens in a race like that, I was just telling somebody recently, doing lake swims for training, or doing, open water swims for, these sprint distance races I do, anything that's in a lake, the smell of the lake water. Like I said, I was a panicky swimmer to begin with, but you combine the smell of the lake water, the scene of the transition area, the whole thing. You want to talk about flashbacks. People they think I'm insane to do this. Some people don't necessarily understand why I would continue to do this sport, and they think it's not necessarily smart or whatever. That is the reason I continue to do this, but I would never have been able to do these races and continue this sport that I actually really enjoy without these two. You guys have been amazing, and without you, I think I probably would have maybe tried another one and then said, okay, I did it, and put it in my pocket and move on. I think that's probably what my plan was. And then I started getting inspiration and motivation and coaching, actual coaching from the two of you. And the little technical things you've taught me, the mindfulness you've taught me, all of the things you've taught me. If you can take a non-athlete like me who's been through what I've been through, and I'm continuing to do what I'm doing, it is not without YogiTriathlete. You guys are amazing, and we need to all support. Everybody out there needs to support you guys, because it's beyond words. Again, I'll need that scroll of paper to write down why we need to all support you, because you give it back to everybody in so many ways. So thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gail. I mean, you're such a pillar of strength. I mean, we're talking about a woman here who has been through some big things in her life, and somehow you have managed to pick it up and get back in that wetsuit and kill it on the swim, and not only kill it on the swim, but enjoy it. And I've worked with you through moments of panic in the water, and there were times where we would be in the lake and I would literally be connecting in with Jimmy's soul and just saying, help me with the words to encourage her, and not seeing you as a victim, but come on, Gail, you can do this. Like, I'm right here next to you. You can do this. And you not only do it, you kick ass at being a mom and everything that you do. And then you have this wonderful man in your life now who we love so much, Joe, who definitely was heaven sent, and two kids that, like you said before, you're raising good people. You're raising amazing, beautiful people to help others in this world. And I think you're amazing. And so if you look to us for strength, just know that we look to you for the same thing.
And I'll just be following you along on the Ride the High Vibe tour. Every time you turn around, you'll be like, who's that person that's following us? That's going to be me. Yeah. Because I need you guys, so just stay in touch.
Well, we all need each other. Yep. So thank you so much for sharing so openly about such a big thing in your life. But I think it's so important because there's a lot of people out there dealing with loss. There's a lot of people out there dealing with heart disease. And just watch those signs. Oh, it's so important. And take every moment to be as precious as it truly is.
And listen to your body.
All right. Thank you so much, cousin.
I love you. I love you. Thank you for having me, guys.
That was it, another episode of the YTP. And was that crazy or what? It's so hard for me to believe and even remember at this point that Gail and I were kept apart for so many years, and that it was a separation that was sparked and kept alive by the deep pain of loss. And it's hard for me to believe that Gail, that she grew up without a mother, and now her children are going to grow up without their father. And that life, like in this logical sense, it doesn't always make sense. right? But there's like this truth, this undeniable truth about what life serves us up in any given moment that requires us to move through its experiences. Like we have to move through these experiences so that we can continue to live. And to see Gail race a triathlon after her husband died during one is one of the most inspiring examples of strength that is within all of us. And I believe that our reconnection in this life is a testament to never giving up, that no matter what life serves us, we must have extreme faith that we can move past the experience and live fully once again. So thank you so much for tuning in. Please share your feedback with us, share this podcast with your friends, and leave us a review on iTunes. Until next time, you guys, ride the high vibe, always, no matter what.